Ladies and gentlemen, sometimes the loudest message you'll ever send to a man is the one you never speak. The moment you stop chasing, stop explaining, and simply match his silence, everything changes. Suddenly, he starts hearing the echo of your absence louder than he ever heard your voice. He begins to realize that the woman he thought would always be there isn't. And that silence he once used to control you, it becomes the silence that haunts him, because nothing makes a man reflect harder than the moment you stop reacting. When you stop explaining yourself, when you stop trying to convince someone to care, and when you finally match his silence with your own, something powerful begins to shift. It's not about ego. It's not about pretending you don't care. It's about choosing to value your peace more than proving your point. There comes a moment when you realize that silence isn't weakness, it's emotional power. Because anyone can talk, anyone can beg, anyone can chase. But it takes real inner strength to say nothing and let your actions, your composure, and your absence speak for you. When a man pulls away, most people react out of fear, the fear of losing connection, of not being enough, of being forgotten. That fear drives them to reach out, to explain, to fix. They send one more message, call one more time, ask one more question. And yet, the more they chase, the further he drifts. Every time they do that, they hand him their power. They show him that their emotional state depends on his response. But when you choose silence, you interrupt that pattern. You stop feeding his ego with your reactions. You stop teaching him that he can withdraw whenever he wants and still have you waiting. Silence says, I respect myself enough to stop chasing where I'm not being met. It says, if you wanted to talk, you would. It says, I'm not going to compete for a place in your life. A true silence is full of self-awareness. It's realizing that peace is worth more than temporary reassurance. Silence is what happens when you finally stop trying to be understood by someone who doesn't value your words. Oh, 60-40, the power of not Rayman can only feel comfortable in silence when he knows he still has your energy waiting on the other side. When he senses that you're still emotionally invested, that you're still hoping he'll come back, he feels safe taking his time. But when your silence is steady, unshaken, and calm, he begins to feel something different, uncertainty. He starts to wonder what's happening on your side of that silence. He begins to question whether you've moved on, stopped caring, or found peace without him. That's the power of silence. It plants doubt in the mind of someone who thought he had you figured out. He expected you to chase. But when you give him nothing, no reaction, no explanation, no validation, it forces him to confront the reality that you were never desperate, you were simply invested, and investment can end when respect does. When you match his silence, you shift the power dynamic. You stop reacting and start observing. At first, he feels relief. He thinks, finally, I have space. But soon, that space becomes quiet, and quiet becomes heavy. The same silence that once felt like control starts to feel like loss. The distance that made him feel powerful begins to make him question everything. When you were always available, he took you for granted. But when your energy withdraws, he's forced to feel what life is like without it. He remembers the way you laughed, cared, and made him feel understood. Slowly, those memories replace the comfort of his silence. That's the beauty of not reacting. You don't force clarity, you allow it. This passage beautifully captures one of the most profound truths about human behavior and emotional connection. That silence, when chosen consciously, becomes far more powerful than words ever could. When someone always has access to your attention, they never have to question their own behavior. They know that no matter what they do, ignore you, withdraw, or take you for granted, you'll still be there, ready to engage, ready to explain, ready to fix things. That consistent availability feels comforting to them, but it also creates complacency. It teaches them subconsciously that your presence is guaranteed. But when you stop giving that access, when you step back and let silence speak for you, everything shifts. Suddenly, there's a void where your energy used to be. They can no longer reach for you whenever they want validation or reassurance. That quiet space you create isn't just an absence, it becomes a mirror. It forces them to see themselves, their actions, their neglect, and the impact of their choices without the distraction of your words or emotions cushioning the truth. Silence has a way of stripping away illusions. When you stop responding, there's nothing for the other person to push against. No arguments, no explanations, no emotional reactions to deflect the responsibility they should be facing. In that quiet, they're left alone with their own conscience. It's then that reflection begins, often slowly, often uncomfortably. They start to remember the things they took for granted: your patience, your kindness, your effort, your consistency. The things that once felt ordinary now begin to feel irreplaceable. The line "your silence doesn't demand attention. It earns it" speaks volumes about dignity. Demanding attention is rooted in insecurity, in the need to be seen, validated, or understood. Earning attention, however, comes from self-respect. It's the energy of someone who knows their worth and doesn't need to chase recognition. Your silence becomes proof that you don't need to plead to be valued. You simply withdraw, and that withdrawal says everything. And that's where the irony lies. The more you pull back, the more their mind fixates on you, not because you're playing games, but because silence creates curiosity and discomfort. It breaks the pattern they've become used to. They expect a reaction, an explanation, maybe even anger, but when none comes, it disarms them. They're left wondering, why isn't she reacting? Has she stopped caring? Has she moved on? That uncertainty breeds introspection, and introspection often leads to regret. Your lack of reaction forces them to face themselves. They're no longer focusing on what you're doing. They're finally confronting what they've done. Your silence becomes a mirror reflecting back the truth they avoided. They begin to see the imbalance, the disregard, the way they took your consistency as a given. In essence, silence becomes both a teacher and a revealer. It teaches you restraint, strength, and the value of emotional control. At the same time, it reveals to the other person the consequences of their actions, not through confrontation, but through absence. That's the real beauty of it. You're not punishing anyone. You're not manipulating or withholding love. You're simply honoring your peace. And in doing so, you force reality to reveal itself. The person who truly values you will feel the weight of that silence and reach back. The one who doesn't will stay distant. And that clarity is the greatest gift silence can ever give. Ultimately, silence is not about ignoring someone. It's about no longer interrupting their lessons with your explanations. It's standing still long enough to let truth rise to the surface. And when it does, you see everything. Their intentions, their effort, their heart, exactly as it is. Silence doesn't just expose others. It enlightens you. This passage is about the quiet transformation that happens when you stop reacting impulsively and start responding from a place of awareness, strength, and self-respect. It speaks to the power of restraint, not as suppression, but as mastery. When you stop reacting, you begin to notice how much energy you've poured into being understood, trying to prove your worth, justify your feelings, or get someone else to see your point of view. You realize that this constant need for validation has been draining you, keeping you in a cycle of emotional dependency. The moment you step back from that cycle, clarity arrives. You begin to see the situation for what it really is, not through the fog of your emotions, but through the stillness of perspective. Peace starts to feel more valuable than being right. Instead of chasing understanding, you start valuing quiet. You understand that not everything needs a reaction, not every misunderstanding needs correction, and not every distance needs to be closed. That realization is the foundation of emotional freedom. Self-control, as the passage says, is not about pretending you don't feel anything. It's about feeling deeply, anger, sadness, fear, longing, and still choosing not to let those emotions dictate your behavior. It's standing in the middle of the storm within you and saying, I won't let this storm decide who I am. That kind of inner stillness doesn't come from indifference. It comes from wisdom. The understanding that reacting might ease your anxiety momentarily, but it often makes things worse in the long run. When a man pulls away or when anyone withdraws, the natural human instinct is to close the gap, to reach out, to fix things. That impulse comes from fear of abandonment, fear of rejection, fear that the silence means you're not valued. But when actions are rooted in fear, they rarely create connection. Fear doesn't draw people closer, it suffocates, it pressures, it chases away. The harder you try to fix the distance, the more you confirm it. That's why the only true way to change the pattern is through emotional discipline, the ability to pause, breathe, and allow space. Discipline doesn't mean coldness. It means giving your emotions time to settle before you act. It means choosing what honors your peace, not what calms your panic. When you act from discipline rather than fear, you stop feeding the cycle of desperation and start nurturing self-respect. In that space, silence becomes your strength. It's not the silence of withdrawal or punishment. It's the silence of confidence. It says, I trust myself. I trust that I don't need to chase clarity. It will reveal itself in time. Your stillness communicates something words never can: maturity. It shows that you have control over your emotions instead of letting them control you. That calm, grounded energy is magnetic. In a world where everyone reacts, where people rush to text back, defend themselves, argue, or explain, composure becomes rare. It draws attention without trying. People feel that calm and are subconsciously drawn to it because it represents safety, strength, and self-assurance. Silence and composure don't mean detachment, they mean power. When you're no longer a slave to reaction, you start living from intention. You begin to protect your peace as something sacred. You no longer rush to fix what isn't yours to fix. You learn that clarity doesn't come from chasing answers. It comes from giving things space to unfold. So when you stop reacting, you don't just change how you handle others. You change your relationship with yourself. You learn to sit with uncertainty without crumbling. You learn that peace is not something you find in others, it's something you create within yourself. And once you experience that, validation starts to lose its appeal. Because peace lasts longer than being understood. Peace doesn't need anyone else to agree with you. Peace is knowing that you don't have to prove your worth. You simply live it. That's the essence of this message. Your silence, your composure, and your restraint are not signs of weakness. They're evidence of evolution. They show that you've stopped living reactively and started living intentionally. And that shift is what makes you powerful in ways words never could. This passage reveals a profound truth about emotional strength, that real confidence isn't loud, reactive, or constantly proving itself. It's quiet, composed, and rooted in trust. Silence, in this context, isn't about ignoring someone or being detached. It's about mastering your energy so deeply that you no longer feel the need to control everything outside of you. When it says, your silence is not coldness, it's confidence, it's redefining what silence truly means. People often misunderstand silence as disinterest or punishment, but true silence, the kind born from self-awareness, is actually warmth turned inward. It's you saying, I don't need to respond to everything to have peace. I can sit with not knowing. I can let things unfold without forcing them. That's confidence, the kind that doesn't rely on reaction, validation, or reassurance. When you stop reacting, you stop giving away your power to every situation or person that disturbs your calm. Instead of trying to manage someone else's behavior or emotions, you shift your focus inward to what you can control: your energy, your response, your peace. You start realizing that calmness is not something others grant you, it's something you create by choosing not to let external chaos dictate your internal state. This is where silence becomes a teacher. It teaches patience, the ability to wait without anxiety, to pause before reacting, to let time reveal truth instead of trying to extract it through confrontation. Patience is not passivity, it's controlled strength. Silence also teaches boundaries, the invisible line between what deserves your attention and what drains it. Through silence, you learn that not every situation requires your voice, not every person deserves your explanation, and not every misunderstanding needs correction. And perhaps most importantly, silence protects your peace. When you stop explaining yourself to people who don't want to understand, or stop trying to fix what's not yours to fix, you preserve the most valuable resource you have: emotional energy. Protecting your peace doesn't mean avoiding pain. It means refusing to prolong it through unnecessary reactions. Then comes the truth at the heart of this passage: silence becomes a test of value. When someone truly values you, your silence will draw them closer. It will make them reflect, make them realize what your presence brings to their life. But when someone doesn't value you, your silence will expose that too, not by punishing them, but by showing you their real intentions. If your absence doesn't move them, that's your answer. And that's why silence is such a win-win. If they come back, you've been reminded of your worth. If they don't, you've been freed from illusion. Either way, you gain clarity. The passage also reminds us that silence is not passive. It's active energy. It's the quiet assertion of self-trust. It's you saying, I believe in divine timing, in alignment, in the idea that what's truly mine will never require me to beg or chase. That's not indifference. That's faith in your value. You're no longer moving from desperation, you're moving from trust. When you embody that kind of calm energy, everything about you changes. Your communication becomes intentional. Your relationships become cleaner. You stop trying to convince anyone to stay. You stop forcing connections. You stop fighting for what's slipping away. Instead, you focus on your alignment, on being the kind of person who attracts what they deserve naturally without chase or struggle. That's the real meaning of power here. Power isn't dominance. It's control over your reactions. It's the ability to stay centered no matter what's happening around you. When you reach that state, silence is no longer uncomfortable. It's sacred. It's your reset button. It's the space where you hear your own voice again, where you reconnect with your peace, your purpose, your strength. So this passage isn't just about silence in relationships. It's about the larger philosophy of emotional sovereignty. It's about trusting life enough to stop grasping for control. It's understanding that what's meant for you will never have to be forced, and what needs to leave will do so no matter how tightly you hold on. When you stop fighting, stop chasing, and simply allow, you step into alignment with something much higher than fear, faith. That's the shift from chaos to clarity, from reaction to reflection, from attachment to freedom. And that final line, that kind of peace, that's power, captures it perfectly. Peace is the ultimate form of power because it means you've reached a place where nothing outside of you can shake your inner stability. You've stopped needing validation to feel secure. You've stopped confusing silence with weakness. You've realized that the most commanding energy in any room is the one that doesn't need to prove anything. That's what true confidence sounds like, not loud, not defensive, not desperate, just quiet, steady, and unbothered. The kind of energy that speaks volumes without saying a word. This passage is about reclaiming power through self-worth, about understanding that sometimes silence teaches what words never can. It's not a game, not manipulation, not punishment. It's a declaration of value. The quiet, steady realization that your presence is a privilege, not a guarantee. When you match his silence, it means you stop overextending yourself in a relationship or situation where effort has become one-sided. It's the moment you stop chasing answers, stop fighting to be understood, and instead allow space to do the talking. That choice isn't made out of spite. It's made out of wisdom. The understanding that if someone needs distance, the most powerful thing you can do is give it to them. You're not trying to hurt him. You're showing him the contrast between what life felt like with your energy and what it feels like without it. Your presence once brought warmth, laughter, understanding, support, all the invisible comforts that love quietly offers. But when those things are taken for granted, silence becomes the mirror that reflects their absence. It's in that quiet that he begins to realize what your love truly was. Many people mistake gentleness for weakness. They think patience means you'll always wait, that forgiveness means you'll always stay. But silence breaks that illusion. It reveals that your kindness wasn't submission, it was choice. You gave your energy freely because you cared, not because you lacked strength. When you step back, you remind him that love from you was never something to be assumed. It was something to be honored. That's what the line, "Your love was never weakness. It was strength he couldn't handle," means. It takes immense courage to love deeply in a world that rewards indifference, to stay open when others withdraw, to give without calculation, but that level of love requires emotional depth, and not everyone is ready to meet it. Some people misinterpret it, fear it, or take it lightly because they've never experienced love that pure. Your silence then becomes the moment they finally understand its weight. When you stop chasing, explaining, or fighting to be seen, something remarkable happens. You become unforgettable. Not because of what you say or do, but because of what your absence reveals. The mind fills silence with memory. The heart fills space with realization. Suddenly, all the things they once ignored, your consistency, your empathy, your effort, come rushing back, louder in their absence than they ever were in your presence. Your silence isn't emptiness. It's self-worth. It's you saying, "I don't need to perform to be loved. I don't need to convince someone to choose me. My value doesn't shrink just because someone fails to see it." It's the purest act of self-respect, choosing quiet dignity over desperate noise. When you no longer beg for clarity, you begin to see clearly. You realize that your energy is precious and that giving it to someone who isn't reciprocating only depletes your spirit. So instead, you give it back to yourself. You redirect all that care inward. You nurture your own peace, your own growth, your own happiness. And that shift, that moment you choose yourself without bitterness, is what makes you unforgettable. Because people remember authenticity. They remember strength that doesn't need to shout. They remember the one who could have chased but didn't. The one who could have begged but stayed calm. The one who walked away not because they stopped caring, but because they started caring for themselves. That's what it means when the passage says, "Your silence will echo longer, louder, and deeper than any words ever could." Words can be dismissed, debated, or forgotten, but silence lingers, it haunts. It makes people confront their own behavior without distraction. It leaves space for reflection, the kind that words often interrupt. The echo of your silence is not revenge, it's revelation. It forces him to see what he lost, not because you told him, but because you stopped trying to prove it. The echo lives in the unanswered text, the absence of your voice, the sudden stillness where your energy once filled the room. That's when realization begins to dawn. that your love wasn't ordinary, that your presence was grounding, and that your departure was a consequence, not a game. So this passage is really about emotional maturity, about knowing when to speak and when to let silence deliver the message for you. It's about understanding that detachment doesn't always mean you've stopped loving. It means you've stopped betraying yourself in the name of love. Your silence becomes your boundary, your protection, and your proof of growth. It's the language of self-respect, one that doesn't shout, doesn't demand, and doesn't plead. It simply exists, steady and powerful, saying everything that needs to be said without uttering a word. And in that silence, you rediscover your power, not the kind that controls others, but the kind that controls yourself. You realize that your worth doesn't depend on who recognizes it, it simply ever is. And that kind of quiet, radiant strength, it doesn't fade. It leaves an imprint that echoes long after words have stopped.